Sir William Seo.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker, and greetings and acknowledgement to members of this House. This is a great bill, and I'm privileged with the opportunity to be able to take a call on it. We in Labour will fully support this bill through the legislative process. This bill is, after all, a bill which the previous Labour government has done all the work on. Under a Labour government, a review was initiated on the treatment of overseas pensions and payment of New Zealand superannuation and veterans' pensions overseas. This review began in 2002 and was completed in October 2007. Appropriately, the review was undertaken by the Ministry of Social Development and the Treasury. It is comforting to know that other government agencies, such as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Ministry of Pacific Island Affairs, Inland Revenue, and the Department of Labour were consulted and provided advice throughout the review. I'm glad also that the review took into account the views expressed in correspondence to the Ministry of Social Development and to various ministers then on the treatment of overseas pensions and payment overseas provisions. I want to therefore acknowledge my friend and colleague, the Honourable Ruth Dyson, for all her work and effort in ensuring that this work took place. The Honourable Ruth Dyson, as the previous Minister, had a good rapport with all of our communities throughout New Zealand and was in tune with the needs of our communities, and in this case, with the pensioners and veterans. I also want to acknowledge the Minister, the Honourable Paula Bennett, for keeping this bill alive and for allowing it to proceed through the legislative system of this House. In my view, Mr. Speaker, this is an extraordinary thing that the Minister has done, and I suspect it would have required her to have enormous courage to do so, as I've noticed that anything that Labour has worked on or introduced or is associated with Labour suddenly gets dumped. And we've seen examples of this with the dumping of not only Ross Wilson as the chair of ACC, but more dumpings by the Minister of ACC of other board members. So I do acknowledge the Minister for bringing this bill through. And some in this House might say, why should we acknowledge the Minister, the Honourable Paula Bennett, when she has not done anything regarding this work? And I would like to think that she had courage to convince her Cabinet colleagues that even though this bill was introduced by the previous Labour government, that she should still advance it through this House. So I salute you, the Honourable Paula Bennett. And it is an extraordinary thing as well, Mr. Speaker, that she has done advancing this bill because of the environment that the national government has created around superannuation generally. And I just want to give you some context in which we're now debating this bill. And I would say to members of the national government, that members of this House, that the national government has created a lot of worry and uncertainty around superannuation. Earlier in the year, the national government created uncertainty around the future of the super fund with comments about borrowing to fund it and suggesting investment losses, and never for 1 minute recognising that the super fund operates on the long-term strategy. And National has always been uncomfortable around superannuation, is now refusing to rule out plundering the super fund. In fact, comments made by the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance were captured in newspaper headlines such as, and I quote from the National Business Review on the 27th of February of this year, quote, "Stopping super payment inevitable," unquote. Another quote from the Southland Times on the 25th of February, quote, "Key won't rule out super fund suspension," unquote. And these kinds of headlines, Mr. Speaker, only remind grey power and senior citizens throughout New Zealand of the national government in the 1990s. And you'll know about the comments about no ifs, no buts, no maybes. Yep, and then the national government of the 1990s broke their pre-election promise to scrap that surcharge and instead increased it from 20 to 25% and lowered the income exemption so that more superannuitants were affected by the surcharge. In 1998, the national government linked super to the level of consumer price index. At the same time, they cut its relative level from 65% to 60% of the average wage, which it was estimated would lead to between a third and a half of New Zealand's elderly living in poverty.
Who was Minister of Finance?
Yes, who was Minister of Finance? That's right. And so the newspaper headlines which captured the national government's attitudes towards superannuation in the 1990s, and here goes. The Evening Post of 13 January 1999, and I quote, "Government looked at bigger super cuts." Another one from the Daily News on the 2nd of February 1999, and I quote, "Super sacrifice." And Mr. Chair, this is the kind of background in which we now debate this bill, and that is one of the reasons why I said it must have taken courage for the Honourable Paula Bennett to advance this bill, particularly when the rest of her front bench are intending to do other things with superannuation. So we come now to the bill. The social assistance payment of New Zealand superannuation and veterans pension overseas amendment bill. That's right. This is the bill, as I said, that Labour is supporting. And the bill is aimed to ensure that New Zealanders who wish to retire overseas are able to do so comfortably in the country of their choice. When I look through the bill, Mr. Chairman, this is a bill that, as my colleague Dr. Rajan Prasad has said, it is pro-family. It is a bill that recognises that we, the ordinary New Zealand or Kiwi family, has international links. The Minister mentioned Croatia. I would say in my electorate, we've got Māori who live out in Japan, live in China, and parents like to visit their kids out there, stay a little. We have Pacific people who are linked, who have family in Rome, family in the USA. We have Latin American, Chinese, UK, in my community and you've got parents and grandparents who are travelling around and wanting to spend time, sometimes a year, sometimes 2 years, sometimes more, with young relatives who live out there. I'd be very much interested, sir, in hearing the views of some of these families with regard to this bill. I'm pleased that it will be going to a select committee, and I would be interested in particular, we have church organisations who send out elderly people on missions, sometimes 2, 3, 5 years or longer, and I would be interested in hearing their view in terms of what, if any, impact this bill may or may not have on them. I'm particularly interested also in the view of Pacific communities. This bill states that it does specify 22 Pacific countries that are entitled or that we will have relationships with under this bill. And I'd be interested to know the relationship or the views of some of the Pacific individuals and Pacific communities who have experience in this regard. I heard earlier a member from the ACT Party mention also the potential problems associated with our relationship with Australia. I've had a couple of families who have come to me with similar problems with Australia, particularly those who have come here or have gone to Australia, and the difficulty that they've had in securing their particular pension. I'd be interested in hearing views from families who've had difficulty in transporting their pension via Australia and New Zealand. I can see that you're getting tired and my time is running out, so pretty pleased to speak towards this bill. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Oh, very good.